Now, this is Cambridge Assessment International Education, and it is advanced subsidiary and A-level economics. That's paper 4. A-level data response and essays. The paper was taken February, March 2023, and the code is 9708/42. Now, the question that we want to consider in this particular video is section B, question 1. So here, the use of air travel leads to market failure caused by negative externalities. With the help of a diagram, assess the extent to which a government can intervene to correct this market failure. Now, this is how we want to go through it. And the first case, we need to consider what we mean by negative externalities. Negative externalities occur when a third party suffers from the actions of others. Now, in the case of air travel, these include pollution, noise, and congestion, which are not reflected in the ticket prices. Now, what this implies is that the ticket prices probably represent the private costs of the airlines, but it does not necessarily reflect the social cost. So that is what leads to negative externalities and market failure, because resources are not objectively allocated, because if forces of demand and supply are allowed to operate in a market, then they resources are efficiently allocated to areas where they are needed, where people can pay for them, and where the resources will be engaged optimally. So types of negative externalities in air travel. One is environmental pollution. That is, aircraft emit greenhouse gases, contributing to climate change and air pollution. The second externality, the second type that you can see is noise pollution. Airports generate significant noise, impacting the health and well-being of nearby residents. Now, that's another social cost of the airlines. Then the other one is congestion. High air traffic can cause congestion both in the air and at airports, leading to inefficiencies and delays. So looking at those types of negative externalities in air travel, then we define market failure as, in a free market, the price of air travel does not reflect these external costs. That is the cost that I've mentioned up there, because when we've got environmental pollution, there are diseases associated with that. And when one's health is not well, when one's well-being is not observed, then that's a cost, because you consider when one is ill, he or she is not able to perform the daily tasks, and at the same time spends money going to the hospital. So in that light, if I look at environmental pollution or noise pollution, the discomfort that brings, again, is a social cost to the society. So market failure, in a free market, the price of air travel does not reflect these external costs, leading to overconsumption and underpricing of air travel services. Now, this market failure necessitates government intervention. So what we are saying is that looks like the private costs that are met by the airlines that are reflected in the ticket don't take care of the social costs that the society bears as a result of the airlines having to transact their business. And so there is need for the, and we see economic economic problem that brings is that if in a free market we allow demand and supply to dictate the demand and supply, and so price at the equilibrium point that is so defined. But in airlines, we see that that is not the case. In other words, the social cost that is borne by the society appears to be huge, that if it were to be reflected in the ticket in the ticket prices, then the prices that we see now would be would go extremely high. So what we are saying is that as much as the airlines may not be so keen on the social cost that is impacted on the society, there is need for government intervention so that this market failure necessitated by inappropriate way of, not really inappropriate, but imbalanced way of resource allocation and reallocation leads to market failure. And so that market failure should be, there's need for government to intervene so that that particular failure is checked. Now, air travel contributes to significant negative externalities, okay, that we had seen. And these externalities lead to market failure because the private costs incurred by airline companies in terms of fuel, wages, etc., do not fully reflect the social costs, such as the impact on the environment and public health. Now, when market failure occurs, resources are misallocated and the social welfare is not maximized. Now, that is what happens. And we'll see when we'll be considering the curve, we'll see why the social welfare is not maximized. Because this particular industry, if it were to operate at a point where social welfare is maximized, then it will be good for the society, but not to the airlines. So we'll see how the balance, this balance needs to be stricken so that as much as the airlines make their money and make their profit, they also bear the social cost or be wary of the social costs on the society. Now, this now is the diagram that represents what I was referring to. We see that here we have socially efficient price. In other words, we see that at this point there is an intersection. There is an intersection of the marginal social cost curve, which is this. This is the marginal social cost curve, and this is the marginal benefit curve. This is the marginal benefit curve. So at the point where the marginal social cost curve intersect with the marginal benefit curve, at that point we say that is socially efficient price and socially efficient quantity is defined. You can see at that point of intersection where this particular line, which I refer to as marginal social cost, intersects with marginal benefit curve. This point defines socially efficient price, and that price and this quantity takes into consideration the interest and the welfare of the society. But that is not always the case. Farms are supposed to produce here, but they end up producing here. And this is now what we refer to as a competitive price. Now, because everyone is operating in a market where they want to make profit, and we had seen that in a perfectly competitive market, firms should be price takers because the forces of market, the forces of demand and supply dictate the conditions in the market. Now, in this case, we see that this competitive price is defined at the point of intersection between private marginal costs and marginal benefit. Private marginal cost and marginal benefit. So this private marginal cost This is what the airlines refer to as the wages, fuel, and other expenses. See to it, realize that the private marginal cost is actually ignorant or actually ignores the marginal social cost. So we see a difference between marginal social cost and private marginal cost. That difference between private marginal cost is what we define as marginal external cost. And that is the cost that is borne by the society, which the airlines are not accounting for. If at all this cost was to be accounted for, then prices that are reflected in the ticket would change, and appropriately demand for airlines will adjust appropriately in line with demand and supply and price. So we'll not be having a situation where we have overconsumption as a result of underpricing of the facility. Now, as we had seen, private marginal cost, this reflects the cost that the airline companies face when operating flights, such as fuel costs, wages, and maintenance. So that's what we had referred to as the private marginal cost. So it's this private marginal cost is that, and social marginal cost. This includes the private marginal cost plus the external costs. So it includes pollution, noise, congestion that society bears due to due to air travel. So social marginal cost is this, and it's represented by this particular curve. And you can see that if you were to consider the area below the marginal social cost, that is the area below it here, that area is made up of private marginal cost plus marginal external cost, meaning that this curve takes care of the private marginal cost of the airlines and also takes care of the marginal external cost that would otherwise be borne by the society if the airline was ignorant of the plight of the society. Now, marginal social benefits. This represents the overall benefit to society from air travel, including convenience, trade, and tourism. So these are the benefits that particular business presents to the society. Then market equilibrium. The free market equilibrium occurs where demand equals the private marginal cost. That is, demand here is defined as marginal social benefit. That is the demand curve. And you see that it slopes as we expect. Marginal benefit here flows, if you look at the gradient, that gradient is what we would expect out of a normal demand curve, where as the price reduce, more is consumed. As price is reduced, more is consumed. That's how the normal demand curve for a normal good behaves. Then what do I have here again? Yes. Then I have socially optimal level. The socially efficient level of output occurs where the marginal social cost equals the marginal social benefit. At this point, fewer flights, that is here now, that is here, that is here. You see that here the quantity is this, social efficient quantity is here, but the quantity, the competitive quantity is higher than the social efficient quantity. So that's why we are saying socially optimal level occurs where the marginal social cost equals the marginal social benefit. Now, at this point, fewer flights would be produced and prices would be higher. So the effect with that, if at all the airlines decided to bear the social cost on or the external costs, then we are likely to see a hike in prices of their tickets. And if prices are hiked, then resources will be will actually readjust in an efficient way following value. And in that case, when resources are allocated efficiently, following the right market forces of demand and supply, then we don't end up with situations where the factors of production are unemployed, and at the same time, we reduce the number of flights that are seen on the skies, and we gain on we advance on the gains of climate change. Then marginal external costs, as we had seen, that it is the difference between private costs and the cost that external. Actually, the cost from here, we see that it is, let me just see in diagram. So you see here, marginal external cost, we said that marginal social cost is equal to marginal external cost plus private marginal cost. That's what we said. So this is the marginal cost that we are referring to, and we are saying it refers to the additional costs imposed on society for each extra unit of a good or service produced or consumed, which is not reflected in the private costs borne by the producer or consumer. So for every, because the price, the ticket prices are relatively considered to be low now because they don't reflect the social cost as otherwise would be expected. That's why we are having every extra flight you see on the sky imposes an additional cost on the society. And that's what we refer to as marginal external cost. So these external costs are typically borne by third parties of the environment and are not included in the market price of the product or service. So examples of marginal external cost in airline include air pollution, noise pollution, climate change impacts, and congestion at airports, which affect society but are not paid for by the airline or its customers. So on that graph, it is the vertical difference between the private marginal cost and the social marginal cost, as we have seen. So the SMC curve lies above the PMC curve by the amount of the MEC. And that's why we said that the SMC is equal to PMC plus MEC. Thus, yeah, like we have here, thus MEC will be SMC minus PMC. So incorporating the MEC into pricing through taxes or regulations helps to align market output with socially optimal level by internalizing the external costs. So government interventions that can be seen should be aimed at internalizing the external costs so that they are reflected in the pricing strategies of the airlines. Then market failure due to negative externalities in air travel. This we had seen that air pollution, aircraft emissions contribute to greenhouse gases, including CO2, which leads to global warming and climate change. Then airports, especially in urban areas, generate noise, which reduces the quality of life for nearby residents. We had seen that as well. Congestion, both on the ground at airports and in the air. Crowded flight paths, congestion leads to inefficiencies and longer travel times. Now, in a free market, airlines base their pricing and output decisions on their private costs. And now that's the problem, that they base their pricing and output decisions on their private costs, ignoring the social costs that they impose on society. As a result, air travel is overconsumed, leading to a market failure. The reason why it is overconsumed because it is cheap. In this context, we refer to the prices reflected in the ticket as cheap because they don't take care of the social cost that is impacted on the environment and on the people around. Then government interventions to correct this particular failure should include, we said earlier that the aim now should be to internalize the externalities so that they're reflected, so that these costs are accounted for by the airlines and consumers of air travel. So one way of intervening would be through taxes and charges. So carbon tax is one familiar way that most economies now enjoy what we refer to as the carbon credit. Now, a tax on the carbon emissions produced by airlines would raise the cost of flying, forcing airlines to account for the environment and environmental damage they cause. The tax shifts the private marginal cost curve upwards to the socially marginal cost curve, making the airlines internalize the external cost. Now, this would reduce the number of flights to the socially optimal level. So, what we are saying is that if a tax is imposed, this would reduce the number of flights that we see on the sky because prices shall have increased, and that particular level of output, the number of flights that we'll be observing in the sky, will be socially optimal. Actually, it will be a socially optimal level, a level that does not impact extra costs on the society. Second is airport charges and noise taxes. This is another intervention. Now, higher charges on airport use, especially in congested or urban areas, could discourage excessive flights and reduce congestion and noise pollution. By taxing these negative externalities, the government ensures that airlines and passengers pay for the full social cost of their activities. Now, that's another intervention. Then fuel taxes. Increasing taxes on aviation fuel can similarly raise the cost of air travel, reducing demand and limiting the environmental damage caused by emissions. Regulation. We can also see this through regulations by imposing emission standards. Governments can impose stricter emission standards on aircraft, requiring airlines to use more fuel-efficient planes or adopt cleaner technologies. This regulation will directly reduce the environmental externalities, though it may raise the cost of air travel. Two, noise pollution. But anyway, even if it raises the cost of air travel, that should reduce the supply or demand of the same service to a level that is socially optimal. Yes. Then noise pollution regulations. Restrictions on night flights or limits on the noise levels at airports can mitigate noise pollution. These regulations can directly reduce the negative externalities affecting communities near airports. Of course, such regulations also have consequences because now if you restrict flights, night flights, owing to the fact that we have different time zones and we fly so that we take care of time. Again, those are now contradicting issues. But so a balance needs to be stricken so that we know to what extent such regulation can bring the equilibrium closer to the socially optimal level. Another one is cap and trade systems. Government could also implement a cap and trade system for airline emissions, where a cap is placed on the total allowable emissions, and airlines can trade emissions permits. This market-based approach ensures that emissions are reduced while still allowing airlines flexibility in how they meet their emissions targets. So a cap here is now, this is an allowable limit of emission. So for the airlines that maintain that, they can get what is referred to as a credit. They get an advantage out of this. And for ones that exceed, should actually be penalized for going beyond the standards. Then we have subsidies for clean technology. Again, there's a way in which we can see government's intervention. So governments can provide subsidies or tax breaks to airlines that invest in cleaner, more fuel-efficient aircraft or alternative energy sources such as biofuels. These subsidies encourage airlines to reduce their environmental footprint, effectively lowering the social marginal cost of air travel. Another way would be public awareness campaigns. Governments can also raise public awareness about the environmental impact of air travel, encouraging individuals and businesses to consider alternatives such as rail travel or video conferencing. By reducing demand for air travel, this measure can help reduce the overall negative externalities associated with flying. Then we could assess the effectiveness of government interventions. Now, effectiveness of taxes and charges. Carbon taxes and other levies are effective at raising the price of air travel to reflect its true social cost. Now, this reduces overconsumption, though it may disproportionately affect lower income travelers and have limited impact on wealthier consumers who are less sensitive to price increases. So that's another how to assess the effectiveness of intervention. So we are saying that as much as these taxes are appropriate, there's a class, the wealthy may be immune to such kind of fluctuation in prices and still continue using them. But it may lock out the low income travelers. Then fuel taxes are particularly effective at encouraging airlines to invest in fuel-efficient aircraft, though these take time to implement and the costs are often passed on to consumers. Then we also have airport fees, higher landing and takeoff charges during peak hours to reduce congestion. That is higher landing and takeoff charges during peak hours to reduce congestion. Then regulations, effectiveness of regulation, emission standards and other regulations can significantly reduce the environmental impact of air travel, though they can increase operational costs for airlines and require substantial government oversight and enforcement. Cap and trade systems have proven successful in reducing emissions in other industries and could work well for aviation. However, setting an appropriate cap and managing the trade of permits can be complex. So up to that, we see that, okay, next is subsidies for clean technology. Subsidies can incentivize innovation and the adoption of greener technologies, though they require significant government spending. There's also the risk that that subsidies could be inefficient if they're not targeted at the most effective technologies. Then we have off-peak travel incentive, encouraging airlines to schedule flights during off-peak hours to reduce congestion. Because you see, planning of flights, there's a time when you would expect congestion because there are a number of travelers. But if at all, this rescheduling would ensure that balance is stricken so that we don't have congestion at the airport. Then emission trading schemes. This is another form of cap and trade systems. It allows airlines to buy and sell emission allowances to cap total emissions and incentivize reduction. So the more they manage the emissions, the more incentives that the airlines are going to access. Then effectiveness of public awareness campaigns. Public awareness campaigns can gradually shift consumer behavior towards less environmentally damaging travel options, though the overall impact may be limited if air travel remains convenient and affordable. Now, limitations and potential drawbacks of government intervention. One, so as much as we are saying that air travels lead to market failure due to the negative externalities, we would want the government to intervene so as to address this, so that a balance is stricken. But we are saying that such kind of interventions also have limitations, and one of the limitation is regressive impact of taxes. Taxes on air travel may disproportionately affect lower income individuals, as wealthier travelers are less sensitive to price increases. This could reduce the accessibility of air travel for certain groups. So that's one drawback or limitation of intervention, especially where the government introduces tax to actually try to reach at socially optimal output or supply or demand of that service. Then international cooperation required. Given the global nature of air travel, national policies alone may be insufficient. Global cooperation is needed to ensure that interventions are effective across borders, particularly with respect to emissions, regulations, and carbon taxes. So this is an international territory, and so even if one particular country would decide to make rules, those rules may not work outside their boundaries. But if there is international cooperation, then they can apply across the boundaries. Then trade-offs with economic growth. Restricting air travel can have negative impacts on economic growth, particularly for countries that rely heavily on tourism or global trade. Now, assessment of government interventions. So one advantage of government intervention is internalizing of external costs. We had said that these airlines may not be so keen on the external cost, but now government's intervention will ensure that they internalize such costs into their pricing strategies. Two, incentivizing cleaner technologies. Now, subsidies and emission trading schemes promote innovation and cleaner practices. Three is efficient use of resources. Regulation can reduce congestion, leading to more efficient air travel operations and thus reducing delays. Disadvantages are higher costs for consumers. As we had seen, the wealthier may not feel it because they're not so sensitive to the price changes, but the low-income travelers may feel it big time. Another one is administrative burden. That is, implementing and monitoring these interventions can be costly and complex. Next, potential for market distortion. Excessive intervention may lead to unintended consequences, such as reduced competitiveness of the airline industry. Because you see, these things should be left to the questions of how much to produce, how much maybe to consume, and the price should be left to purely to the forces of demand and supply. And if government intervenes, this may lead to a market distortion. So up to there, that marks the end of this presentation, and thank you. Meet you in my next video. This is Mathematics, Economics, and Finance Online School, where we empower minds, master numbers, and shape futures.